The morning light in the kitchen used to feel soft, like a blanket. That day, it felt sterile, cold, too bright, like the room had been scrubbed of warmth, of memory. I moved slower than usual, not because my bones ached more than yesterday, but because I didn't want to spill the coffee. I had just cleaned the French press the night before, as I always did, not that anyone noticed. The beans were fresh, the cinnamon sprinkle something I knew Brian liked since he was a teenager. I poured it into the mug with the little chip on the rim, the one he always used, though he never said why. Maybe he didn't even remember. He was already at the dining table when I approached, hunched over his laptop with that stern furrow in his brow. Melissa wasn't around, probably upstairs with Emma, their daughter, so I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd pause for a moment. Maybe we could talk. Maybe I could feel like a mother again. "Here you go, sweetheart," I said softly, placing the mug next to his hand. The steam curled between us. He didn't even look up. "Can you give me space?" "I'm in a meeting," he muttered, waving me off with a flick of his wrist. Like a fly. Like background noise. The coffee was still warm. I stood there for another second, maybe 2, before I turned and walked back to the kitchen. I didn't make a sound. My slippers barely whispered against the floorboards. I didn't cry. Not then. It wasn't the first time. Lately, he'd been pulling away in small, quiet ways. Skipped dinners, half answers. Eye contact that didn't quite land. But this was the first time he didn't even acknowledge my presence. Something in me folded, neatly, like a letter you never intend to send. That afternoon, I retreated to my little upstairs room. Not that anyone stopped me. It used to be the guest room, but after George passed, they offered to let me stay for as long as I needed. That's how Melissa had phrased it. I remember because I wrote it down later. As long as I needed. Not wanted. The room smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish. The sun hit the window just right. On the dresser sat a photo of George, taken at the lake the summer before he died. He was holding a fishing rod and grinning, his hat askew. We'd had almost 50 years, together. Quiet, steady love, the kind that doesn't need grand gestures to prove its weight. I picked up the photo and stared into it. "He wouldn't have said that to me," I whispered. And I believed it. Over the next few days, little things shifted. Melissa started making comments about space. "We really should turn your room into a proper office," she said casually one morning while buttering toast. "I mean, with Emma getting older, we're running out of places for her to study." I nodded like I agreed, though my chest tightened like someone had pulled a drawstring. They stopped asking for my thoughts, on anything. Paint colors, weekend plans, groceries. My words landed like feathers in water, soundless, weightless, ignored. When Emma had a school recital, I found out about it only because I overheard her practicing in the living room. I asked if I could come, and Melissa smiled with that careful tightness in her mouth and said, "Oh, it's kind of short notice, and seating's limited. Maybe next time?" There wouldn't be a next time. One night, I passed the hallway and overheard Brian on the phone. He thought I'd gone to bed. His voice was hushed but impatient. "I just don't know how much longer we can do this. It's starting to affect the whole rhythm of the house. She's just there. Just there." I pressed my palm to the wall to steady myself. The wallpaper beneath my hand was pale blue with little white vines. A print I'd picked out, once. Back when this house was new. Back when I was more than a shadow in it. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat up journaling. I hadn't written in years, not since George died. But the pen felt like an anchor. I wrote things I didn't say out loud. They speak over me. They speak around me. I don't know when I became background furniture. The final crack came the following weekend. Melissa was hosting a brunch for her sister. The house smelled of mimosas and hollandaise. I came down wearing my soft pink sweater, the one Emma had once called pretty like cherry blossom. I thought I'd help, maybe greet the guests. Instead, Melissa caught me at the bottom step with a frozen smile. "Oh, Eleanor. It's mostly young couples today. We're trying to keep the vibe light. Maybe you could enjoy some quiet time upstairs." She said it gently, like it was a favor. I nodded, and I went back upstairs. I sat in the chair by the window, the plate of toast I had made still on the side table, untouched. Outside, I could hear laughter, clinking glasses, the kind of life I used to host, the kind I used to be part of. And now I was background. A whisper of a woman who had raised a boy who no longer saw her. I looked down at my hands. They trembled a little, not from age, but from remembering who I used to be. That was when the shift began. I didn't rage. I didn't weep. I didn't make a scene. But I knew, in that very moment, that I would not disappear quietly. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from lack of sound. It comes from absence. The kind where voices still fill the room, but none are meant for you. That silence had settled in our house like dust on an unused piano. It was everywhere. Around the breakfast table, in the hallways, between sentences. The kind of silence that hums with the knowledge that you are no longer being heard. At first, I thought I was imagining it. That maybe I was just being sensitive. But days turned into weeks, and the pattern formed with cruel consistency. Family dinners had always been my favorite. When Brian was a boy, we used to sit elbow to elbow at a long oak table, passing dishes and sharing stories. I still made sure it was set every Sunday. Old habits. But lately, it felt like I was setting it for someone else's family. One Sunday evening, as I placed the mashed potatoes on the table, I noticed they had already started eating. My chair was still tucked under the table, untouched. No one had asked if I'd be joining. I sat down anyway, smiling softly like I hadn't noticed. "Emma's school is doing a space project," Melissa was saying as she cut her chicken. "We thought we'd take her to the science center next weekend." "Oh, that sounds lovely," I said, reaching for the gravy. "Maybe I could come too." Melissa didn't look up. "It's a lot of walking, long stairs and all. We'll bring back pictures." I looked down at my plate. I still had a good stride. I walked around the neighborhood every morning. But none of that mattered, did it? They were carving out a life. That didn't include me. Bit by bit. Quietly. Later that week, I saw Melissa in the kitchen with 2 shopping bags. Colorful, pastel-themed with sparkles and unicorns. "Emma's birthday is this Saturday," she said when she caught me staring. "Oh, it's just a small thing with her friends. Nothing formal." Saturday came and went. I heard the giggles from upstairs. Music, too. That bouncy kind they put in children's party videos. I stayed in my room all afternoon with a book I didn't read. That evening, when I came down for a glass of water, I saw the trash bin by the back door. A deflated balloon, still faintly pink, peeked out the top. It had "Happy Birthday" written in glitter letters. No one had said a word. The following Sunday at church, I wore my navy blouse and pearl earrings, the ones George had given me on our 30th anniversary. I tried to smile the way I used to. Florence, one of the women, from the prayer circle, patted my hand and said, "And how's Brian? You must be so proud, living with your family like that." I nodded, my smile stretching too wide. "He's just busy," I said. "You know how work is. Busy." It was easier than explaining what it felt like to live in a house full of people and still feel like you were haunting it. I walked home alone. The sky was gray, but the air was gentle. As I passed the row of sycamores lining our block, I remembered when Brian was little. He used to pick up the brownest, most brittle leaves and pretend they were pirate maps. "X marks the treasure, Mama," he'd say, waving them in the air. I used to keep some of those leaves in my cookbooks, like bookmarks. They crumbled now. That night I opened my journal again. I had bought it on a whim from a stall at the farmer's market. Hand-stitched, soft leather. At first, it had felt silly, like I was a teenager pouring my heart out. But soon it became the only place where my voice had weight. They laughed in the other room tonight. I wasn't invited. It was about something I said. I could tell. Melissa looked at me when they stopped laughing. It's strange how people can make you feel small without ever raising their voice. I miss George. Not because he fixed anything, but because I never had to explain myself to him. He just saw me. I used to be someone who was asked for recipes, for advice, for help sewing hems. Now I'm someone they shuffle around. Someone in the way of their day. One morning, I came downstairs and found Melissa on the phone. She didn't see me. Her voice was soft, deliberate. "No, we can't make changes until we talk to her lawyer," she said, stirring her coffee. "Yes, I know she's still listed. But once we have her signature..." I didn't stay to listen to the rest. I walked, back up the stairs, gripping the railing a little tighter than usual. The words clung to me. Her lawyer, her signature. They were planning something. Something about me. Around me. That evening, I decided to skip dinner. I told them I wasn't feeling well, which was only half a lie. I lit a candle in my room, opened the window just enough to hear the cicadas, and sat with my journal. I wrote again. Pages this time. They think I'm soft. That I'll just say yes to whatever they want. That I'll fade into memory like wallpaper. But I remember who I am. And I remember what I still own. I tucked the journal under the mattress. That was when it started, I think. The quiet resistance. I didn't know what it would become. I didn't have a plan. But I had a truth. I was still here. And they had forgotten that truth. Sunday afternoons used to mean roast chicken, fresh rolls, and stories shared over too many cups of tea. They used to mean family. Loud, imperfect, but together. I held on to that memory like an old song I couldn't stop humming, even when no one else remembered the tune. That Sunday, I tried one more time. Just a dinner. Just a few hours of togetherness. I knocked gently on the doorframe to the living room, where Brian and Melissa were watching something on TV. The blue glow lit up their faces, both of them half slouched and scrolling their phones, between glances. I was thinking, I began carefully, maybe we could all sit down for dinner together tonight, like we used to. I already made a stew. It's no trouble. Brian let out a long, irritated sigh, the kind that said not this again. "Mom," he muttered, rubbing his temple like my presence gave him a headache. "We're just trying to relax. We don't need a big production." I took a step back. "It's not a production, sweetheart. Just a meal." Melissa didn't even look up. Her voice cut through the air like a cold gust. "Why don't you just go back to the home, Eleanor? That's where people your age belong." The room went silent. Even the television seemed to hush. I stood there, still holding the dish towel in my hand. The edge of it was damp from the sink. My knuckles were white from how tightly I gripped it. Brian didn't say a word. He didn't defend me. He didn't look up. He just tapped his phone screen and kept scrolling. My heart didn't race. My chest didn't heave. The pain was quieter than that. Quieter, but heavier. I turned around slowly, walked back to the kitchen, and placed the towel on the counter. My stew simmered gently on the stove, filling the room with rosemary and thyme. It smelled like care, like intention, like home. but I wasn't home. Not anymore. I climbed the stairs slower than usual, not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to cry while they might still hear me. Inside my room, I shut the door gently, as if the noise might somehow make it worse. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the framed photo on my nightstand. George looked back at me from a different time, his smile wide, his eyes bright. The photo had been taken in our old backyard. He was standing beside the rose bushes, holding a lemonade in one hand, a rake in the other. He always kept the garden neat. He used to say it was how he cleared his mind. I whispered, "Did you hear her?" My voice cracked. "She wants me gone." And he just let her say it. Pressed my fingers against the frame. It was cool to the touch, grounding me. For the first time in years, I cried. Not because I felt hurt, but because I finally believed what had been happening all along. The exclusion, the silences, the subtle dismissals. They didn't see me anymore. Not as a person, not as family, just as a leftover, a burden. When George passed, I gave up my own house to be closer to Brian. I handed over my savings. I helped raise Emma. I cooked, cleaned, folded, mended. I told myself it was enough just to be needed, just to be near my son. But somewhere along the way, I had become furniture in my own story. Something that filled space, but didn't speak. The tears slowed. My breathing leveled out. There was no more sadness in my chest, only clarity. I stood up. I pulled a small suitcase from under the bed. It had dust on the handle. I wiped it clean. I packed quietly. 2 sweaters, a dress, underthings, my church shoes, my journal, and the framed photo of George. I placed it gently between my folded clothes and zipped the case shut. I took one last look around the room. The curtains I had sewn myself. The quilt I had embroidered the first winter I moved in. A book with Emma's handwriting in the margins. She used to read aloud to me before bed. I didn't take any of it. Some stories don't deserve to follow you. I left a note on the dresser. Just one line. "Thank you for everything. I'll be okay." It wasn't bitterness. It was freedom. At the bottom of the stairs, I paused. The house was still humming with television noise and low conversation. I heard Melissa laugh, sharp and clear, followed by Brian's murmur. I stepped outside without making a sound. The sky was beginning to fade into twilight. A breeze picked up, tugging at my coat. I walked down the street, 1 block, then 2. I didn't have a destination. But I had a direction. I called Lorraine from the payphone at the gas station. She answered on the second ring. "Ellie? Everything all right?" I closed my eyes. Her voice was soft and warm, like the tea she always served with lemon. "Can I come stay with you for a little while?" I asked. "Just until I find my footing." "Of course you can," she said. No hesitation. "Your room's still here." She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. That night, I slept in Lorraine's guest room. It was quiet. Not the kind of silence that excludes, the kind that holds space. I lit a candle beside the bed and opened my journal. Today, Melissa told me to go back to the home. I realized I've already been there, in a way. I've lived in a place where I was forgotten, erased. Tonight, I left. Not because I was weak, but because I finally remembered who I am. This silence is not surrender. It is strategy. Lorraine's house smelled of lemon balm and books. A comforting mix. The kind of scent that softened the edges of your thoughts. I had stayed there for nearly 2 weeks before she brought it up. We were sitting in her sunroom, sipping chamomile tea while the wind fussed with the lace curtains. Outside, A robin hopped along the fence, pecking at something I couldn't see. "Ellie," she said gently, her hand wrapped around her mug. "Have you checked your accounts lately?" I paused mid-sip. "My accounts?" She tilted her head. "Your pension, your savings, the things George left you." I blinked, then looked down at my tea. The reflection of my face stared back. Older, wearier, but suddenly more alert. "I haven't touched them in months. Brian, he's had power of attorney since George got sick. It was easier that way." I forced a small smile, but it felt brittle. Lorraine didn't smile back. "Easier for who?" That night, I couldn't sleep. Her question haunted me, pressing against the back of my mind like a creaky door left ajar. I crept down to the guest room study, a place Lorraine rarely used but never cleared out. George's desk was there, the old walnut one he'd insisted on keeping even when it no longer matched anything in our last home. I sat down and opened the top drawer. Pens, rubber bands, a faded envelope addressed to us both from the electric. Company dated 3 years ago. Second drawer, old paper clips, ink refills, an expired fishing license. Then the bottom drawer, the one that always stuck. I tugged until it gave. Inside was a dark green leather folio. Dust covered the edges, but the monogram on the front hadn't faded. GMH George Milton Hayes. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, neatly pressed, were bank statements, account access documents, and a folded letter sealed with a notary stamp. My throat tightened. I opened the letter last, to whom it may concern. As of this day, I, George Milton Hayes, revise my estate plans to ensure that my wife, Eleanor Margaret Hayes, remains the sole and protected owner of our primary residence and all remaining savings accounts. This document supersedes any prior instructions granting shared or extended access to other family members, including our son Brian Hayes. She is to have full legal authority, sole ownership, and unrestricted access to all assets upon my death. Signed and notarized, 2 witnesses present. Date, May 19th, 26. Didn't realize I was crying until a tear dropped onto the page. I wiped it gently with my sleeve. He didn't forget me. He had seen it coming. Not in detail, but enough to know I might one day need protection. I clutched the folio to my chest and sat there in the quiet for what felt like hours. The radiator hissed in the corner. A floorboard creaked above, but I didn't move. In the morning, Lorraine didn't say anything. She saw the folder in my arms and simply poured a second cup of tea. After breakfast, we took a walk, not just to clear our heads, but to clear a path. Her friend Margaret was an attorney, the kind who never fully retired. She welcomed us into her home office with the kind of firm grace only a seasoned woman could carry. I laid the documents on the desk without saying much. Margaret put on her glasses and began to read. Her face shifted slowly, from polite interest to professional concern. When she finally looked up, her voice was quiet, but sure. "Eleanor, I need your permission to access your recent bank statements." I nodded. My stomach was tight, my fingers clenched in my lap. She made a few calls, entered some numbers, logged into some portal I hadn't visited in years. Then she turned the screen toward me. The list stretched down, dozens of transactions, landscaping bills, kitchen renovations, spa packages, online furniture stores, flights to resorts I'd never heard of. "I didn't authorize any of these," I whispered. Lorraine put her hand on mine. "Look here," Margaret pointed, scrolling. "Your pension deposit. Automatically rerouted every month into a joint account Brian opened in your name. The name's there, but he's the only one withdrawing." I stared blankly. "But I didn't even know that account existed." Margaret nodded grimly. "That's the point." The final blow came when she pulled up the estate records. The deed to the house was never updated to include Brian, despite what he may have told creditors or contractors. It's in your name. Sole ownership, Eleanor. That means you can sell it, refinance it, reclaim it. It's yours. I didn't speak. Couldn't. All those months, the isolation, the subtle put-downs, the way they made me feel like a relic clinging to something that wasn't mine. But it was mine. The house. The pension. My dignity. They hadn't been lost. Just taken, quietly, without consent. That evening, back at Lorraine's, I didn't write in my journal. I didn't need to. The clarity had settled like fresh snow, soft but certain. I went to the drawer beside the bed, pulled out the framed photo of George, and whispered, "Thank you." The next morning, I called Margaret. "I'd like to file to revoke the power of attorney," I said, "and I'd like to initiate steps to freeze the joint account." Her response was firm. "We'll start today." I made another call that afternoon, this one to the realtor who had helped us move nearly 10 years ago, a sweet woman named Janet, who always sent Christmas cards. "Hi, Janet," I said after she answered. "I'm thinking about listing a house. It's in my name, but my son's been living there." She paused for a beat. "Do you want to sell quickly or quietly?" "Both," I said. "But mostly I want to do it right." That night, as I folded the letter back into the folio, I felt something shift in me. A reclaiming. Not rage, not revenge. Not yet. Just return. Return to the truth. Return to myself. The office smelled like old leather and paper, that familiar blend of age and order. I sat across from Margaret again, my purse resting in my lap like a shield. She was already on the phone when I arrived, nodding as she spoke, scribbling something on a yellow notepad. When she hung up, she gave me a look that wasn't pity, thank God, but resolve. "We can file the revocation of power of attorney today," she said. "I'll send the paperwork for your signature this afternoon. Once it's filed, Brian will no longer have access to your financial decisions." I nodded slowly, my fingers wrapped around the edges of my purse. "And the accounts?" Margaret pushed a folder toward me. "I've already spoken with your bank. They'll help you set up a new checking and savings account in your name only. We'll have your pension redirected immediately. The joint account can be frozen pending further investigation, especially given the unauthorized activity." Let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It felt like I'd been underwater for months. "What about the house?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "That's where things get interesting." We filed a notice of intent to sell the property. Quietly. Through Janet, my old realtor, who handled the listing with a whisper rather than a shout. No open houses, no flashy signs on the lawn, just quiet inquiries and pre-approved buyers. Within 10 days, there were offers. The home that once held my love, my laughter, my son, and eventually my silence, was about to become someone else's future. I didn't cry. Not when I signed the papers. Not when the sale closed. Not even when I transferred the proceeds into a new account, secured under my name, with a temporary freeze until my plan was complete. There were no tears left for that house. Just resolve. In the weeks that followed, I began sewing again. It started with mending a small tear in one of Lorraine's cushions, then a table runner, then a full quilt. I joined the local quilting group downtown, filled with women whose faces were lined with wisdom and eyes that saw more than they said aloud. We met every Tuesday and Thursday at the community center. I didn't say much at first, but they didn't push. There's a quiet language among women like us, women who have held families together, only to be forgotten in their own kitchens. Stitch by stitch, I felt my center return. One morning, after our quilting circle, I walked through the small park down the street from Lorraine's place. The trees had begun to turn, golden at the tips, a whisper of the season shifting. I found a bench beneath a sycamore and sat there, hands in my lap, watching the wind tease the leaves into dancing. It was the first time in months I wasn't thinking about Brian. I was thinking about myself, not the mother, not the wife, not the shadow in the hallway, just Eleanor. And I realized I liked her. I had missed her. That evening, I opened my journal and wrote with a steadier hand. I used to think healing was something loud, a grand declaration. But maybe healing is quiet. Maybe it's a cup of tea in the right company, a walk without urgency, a stitch in a quilt made only for you. Maybe healing doesn't mean forgetting what they did. It means remembering who you are and doing something about it. I turned the page and wrote again, but this time I wrote a plan. I detailed the timing of the confrontation, the paperwork, the final transfer, the conversation I would have, not fueled by anger, but by truth, because they needed to know. They needed to see that silence had not been surrender. It had been strategy. When the house officially closed, I called the bank and issued a temporary freeze on the funds, just enough time to prepare the legal notice and restructure the trust. The lawyer helped me place a portion of the proceeds into an education fund for Emma, my granddaughter, in my name only. She would have access to it on her 25th birthday. Not before. Not by her parents. It was the only inheritance I still wanted to give. The rest I secured for myself. I rented a small cottage on the edge of a lake, not far from Lorraine's, but far enough from the city to breathe. It had a screened porch, a garden overgrown with stubborn ivy, and an attic that smelled of cedar. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Paid in full. One room I filled with my quilting supplies. Another I turned into a reading room, just a chair, a lamp, and a window that faced the water. I had reclaimed more than assets. I had reclaimed a life. One morning, as I was rearranging old photo albums, I found a snapshot of Brian as a boy, maybe 10 years old with dirt on his cheeks and a wild grin. He was holding a frog in one hand and a popsicle in the other. I stared at the photo for a long while. Where had that boy gone? I didn't know, but I grieved him too. I didn't hate Brian. That was the thing. Hate was too sharp, too active. What I felt was something older, a sadness that had calcified into acceptance. He had chosen convenience over care, control over connection. And now, I had chosen boundaries over begging. That was my revenge, not rage, but reclaiming, not yelling, but leaving, not punishing, but protecting what still mattered. A few days later, I sent a letter to Brian and Melissa. No return address, just a crisp envelope in my handwriting, still steady, still firm. Inside, I enclosed a copy of the legal transfer, a final notice of sale, a list of unauthorized financial transactions with highlighted dates and figures, and a simple note. I gave you everything, my trust, my care, my time. You spent it. This is the balance. From this point forward, we will not speak unless through legal counsel. My granddaughter has a future protected by what you could not be trusted to preserve. That is all you need to know. I sealed the envelope, placed it in the postbox, and didn't look back. I had always imagined confrontations were loud, full of slammed doors and shouted regrets. But this one, the real one, was quiet. Chillingly quiet. The kind of silence that slices deeper than any raised voice ever could. Margaret's office smelled of citrus and wood polish. Her assistant had laid out a silver tray of tea and shortbread, which I knew no one would touch. Sat at the head of the conference table, spine straight, breath steady. In front of me, 3 manila folders, a sealed envelope, and the notarized letter from George, the one that had reminded me I still mattered. At 10:07, the door opened. Brian walked in first, adjusting the sleeves of his blazer as if he were stepping into a business negotiation. Melissa followed, her heels clicking too loudly on the tile. Her lips were pursed in that same condescending smile she wore the day she told me to go back to the home. They didn't greet me, didn't ask how I was. Brian gave a shallow nod to Margaret. "So, what is this, Mom? You ready to talk things through?" He said it like he expected a compromise. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I opened the first folder and slid it across the table. "These are the withdrawal records from the joint account you opened in my name. Unauthorized transactions. Itemized. Each line represents something you took without asking." Melissa shifted, in her seat. Brian glanced at the page, then looked away. I opened the second folder. "These are the pension statements showing the redirection of my monthly income into that same account. There is no record of my consent." Still, they said nothing. I opened the third. "This," I said, tapping the final page, "is the sales deed. The house has been sold. The proceeds are frozen. You have no legal claim to the property." Melissa's face turned pale. Her fingers gripped the arm of her chair. Brian opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "You sold the house?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "Without talking to us?" I looked him dead in the eye. "You mean, without asking your permission?" He stammered. But Emma lives there. That's her home." "No, Brian. That was my home. And she will still have a future because I've made sure of it. You, however, will not be managing it." I reached for the envelope and placed it in front of them, centered between their untouched cups of tea. "This is a legal document outlining the educational trust I've set up for Emma. It is held entirely in her name. It becomes available to her when she turns 25. Not before. Not under your supervision." Melissa opened her mouth. Indignation rising. "You don't have the right—" "I had every right," I interrupted, calm as a winter pond. "Because you never bothered to check whose name was still on the deed. Because you counted on my silence." Brian slammed his hand on the table. "You've gone behind our backs. You think this makes you some kind of hero?" I didn't flinch. I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm trying to survive the people I raised. Margaret leaned forward, finally speaking. "All actions taken by Mrs. Hayes are within her legal rights and supported by the notarized revision of her late husband's estate, which supersedes any informal agreements or prior power of attorney. This meeting is a courtesy. A courtesy. Nothing more." Brian's jaw clenched. "What are we supposed to do now? Start from scratch?" I stood, smoothing the front of my blouse. "You started from scratch the moment you stopped seeing me as a mother and started treating me like a wallet with legs." I walked to the head of the table and turned back only once. "You may have forgotten how to honor your elders, but she still has a chance to learn." I nodded toward the envelope. "Maybe Emma will grow up with more than just things. Maybe she'll grow up with values." Melissa scoffed. "You'll die alone in that lake cottage. No one's coming to check on you in the end." I smiled gently. "And yet, I sleep soundly. Do you?" I reached for my coat. My hand was steady. As I opened the door to leave, I heard Brian mutter something under his breath. A curse. A bitter one. It didn't land. Not this time. The hallway outside felt like fresh air after years in a sealed room. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. Not from fear, but from freedom. When I reached the street, I paused for a moment, staring up at the blue sky. The sun broke through a sliver of cloud, catching on the silver in my hair. I thought of George. "You'd be proud," I whispered, and then I walked on, not away, but forward. 3 years had passed. Seasons came and went like tides. no longer urgent, no longer tied to someone else's schedule. I had found a rhythm here, by the lake, among the pines and the still water. My cottage was modest. 2 bedrooms, one for sleeping, one for sewing and reading. The porch faced the water, and the breeze that came off the lake smelled of damp, earth and pine needles. It was nothing like the old house, and that was the point. There was peace in the simplicity. Peace I never thought I'd earn so late in life. I kept my days full but unhurried. I walked every morning, quilted in the afternoons, and on Sundays, I hosted tea. A few women from town would join me, widows, caretakers, quiet souls who had carried too much and been thanked too little. We never said those things aloud, but we didn't need to. We poured tea like a ceremony. We shared muffins and memories. We laughed in the soft way women laugh when they know they're safe. One afternoon in early spring, I opened the mailbox and found a postcard tucked between a bank statement and a gardening catalog. It was a photo of a sunflower field, bright, and stretching beyond the edges of the frame. I flipped it over. The handwriting was uneven. Not messy. Just unsure. Hi, Grandma. I found your letters in Mom's drawer, the ones you wrote in the journal. I'm sorry. I didn't know everything. I hope I can visit someday. Emma. My breath caught. I read it twice, then a third time. She must have been old enough now to understand, to read between the lines I never meant for her to find. Part of me ached, knowing she had discovered the past like that. Not in person, not with me beside her, but part of me felt lifted. Maybe it wasn't too late. I didn't. Cry, I smiled, a small, soft smile. I placed the postcard on my writing desk, beside the candle, and the smooth river stone George had once picked up for me on a hike. For luck, he'd said, though we both knew he never believed in that sort of thing. That evening, I went into the garden with my gloves and trowel. The soil was damp but not soggy, perfect for planting. I had bought a young rose bush the week before from a roadside nursery. Not the same type George had planted at the old house, but close, a blush pink, soft, resilient. I dug the hole with care, hands steady despite the age in my knuckles. The air smelled of lilac and mulch, and the sky had begun to blush with evening. Placed the bush into the ground and cradled it with earth. My fingers pressed gently around the roots, and for a moment, I imagined I was planting more than just a flower. A memory, maybe. Or a prayer. As I patted the soil smooth, I whispered, "Not everything old is forgotten. Some of us just bloom later." I sat back on my heels, wiped the sweat from my brow, and looked at the rows of green around me. Lavender, mint, marigolds, tomatoes that would ripen by July. It wasn't just a garden. It was proof that life could still be cultivated, even after a long winter I had spent decades giving, then years disappearing. And now, I was here, fully here, not waiting to be invited, not apologizing for taking up space, just growing. The next day I wrote Emma a letter, not long, just honest. Dear Emma, thank you for your words. They meant more than you know. Of course you may visit, anytime you wish. There's always tea here, and a seat by the lake just for you. No explanations needed. Just bring your heart. Love, Grandma. I sealed it, stamped it, and mailed it the same morning. Then I returned to the garden, where the rose bush waited, its leaves catching the sunlight just right, as if bowing in quiet grace. And I realized I didn't need revenge to be whole. I only needed a place to bloom. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt forgotten, disrespected, or erased, know that your worth is never measured by others' memories. Reclaim your voice, and your peace will follow. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever experienced something similar? Let's support each other. And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country below. I'd love to know how far this story travels.